Hey guys! As I said on the last video, this one is going to be a monthly update rather than a weekly one. At this time I also started recording my own work, so I will put through the video some time lapses of me working on different elements of the game, so you guys see how I implemented them. So to start, on the first update I was working mostly on the training system and ideating how it would work. For this, I created training objects that the guy will use in order to improve a different stat or maybe multiple ones. The first training object that I created was the pushing cube. For this, I made a prefab that the guy will interact with that will trigger an animation that will make the guy start pushing the cube around. For now, this prefab was just a placeholder and the training was just visual, with no actual stats going up while training. On this update I didn't work on anything else, so all the menus and the world is the same. So let's move on to the next update. On this update I started working on some mockups for the craft panel. Here I was also working on how to display the information and the layout for objects. Here I made the first mockup to preview an object on the craft menu. I used the ball as a mockup icon in order to imagine how objects would look like. In the game I actually managed to implement a first panel just to have a rough idea and keep working on it based on how it would look like in the game. Here I was working on more mockup updates for the craft panel. I arranged multiple icons into groups to see how they will occupy the space in the screen. I used the default ball prefab to test it out. Here I actually managed a working craft button to put things in the world using the build system, and then the object will spawn in the world in the position that we chose. I was working on the button for the guy actions and how they could look like. Here you can see the evolution of the smash icon and the different iterations I thought before choosing the one I did. As you can see here, I removed the old placeholder for the stats and I started working on a functional stat panel that would display different stat values of the guy. For now, the first one that was working was the strength variable only. Here, it displays the level of the guy on yellow, and we can actually open a second panel that will allow us to increase or decrease the strength variable of the guy. The variable would make him hit things with more or less strength, allowing you to smash faster the rock, as you can see in the game. Here I continued working on more UI updates for the game. I actually moved the energy amount icon outside the craft menu, so you would be able to see if you have energy available all the time. I also moved the energy icons in the craft menu to the bottom to group the different energy materials together. And where the energy icon was before, I put a placeholder for the crafting status indicator. Another new thing in this update was that I added the stat upgrade panel to be able to add and remove energy from the guy. On this update, I made the speed stat to be working with the speed variable of the player. You can see how when the variable is low, the guy is walking, and when we increase the speed, the guy starts to run. You can also see how I added an energy indicator that will show what energy level we have out of 20. For the craft panel, I worked on the ideation of the build menu. I was working on arranging different materials and groups here by making different sketches with different arrangements. I also made the first working object prefabs. I made a running track with its icon and button working, and then I made the pushing cube. The running track would allow the guy to train the speed. Here the energy system was working, so if we wanted to upgrade the stat, we will need to use an energy cube, and for this we will need to collect them. Once we upgrade the amount, we will remove the energy from the energy amount. Here is some footage of how I was working on the running track. There are different points on the track, and after the guy reaches a point, the command will be to chase the next point in the line. Guy was not actually going properly to the next point after reaching the destination, and if I increased the speed of the guy, he would actually go too fast and not be able to brake for the next point, making him go in circles around the next point and not work properly. For the strength values, everything was working as the speed values. Here you can see how I was working on the balancing in order to make it more engaging for the player without being too tedious to level up. I made the full prefab object that will allow the guy to train. You can see how over time the gray squares start going up the more he trains. Once he unlocks the gray value, then we can spend the energy cube to upgrade the strength level, what will allow him to be stronger and smash things harder. You can see a bug that happens is that when the guy ends and wants to cross to the other side of the cube, he goes through the cube. I didn't implement properly the navigation mesh yet for the object. You can see how at level 4 he does a bit more damage than he was doing before at level 1. there were no more changes to the world, so everything is the same as in the previous version. So this is how the menu was looking before this update. And here is a time-lapse of me working on the panels. First, I was working on the icon arrangements. That's why I was moving around everything to see what would be the best looking arrangement. The ball icons were just placeholders for how later on different icons will be arranged in the panel. I changed the organization system to be organized by the function of the object rather than the material. So here I was making the different object groups and changing the colors and the icons. I also worked on different icons, and here I was making an icon for the craft menu button. I wanted the aesthetic of the pixelated art style to be constant in different menus. So that's why I made it this way. Then you can see how after I was done making the changes, I actually built the version with Unity, so then I can test it. So here we can see how we have not only the bold placeholder icons, but 3 actual objects that are finally working. And here you can see how I made a new tree asset that when clicking on the icon will allow us to build a final working tree. This tree was not just smashable, but also had integrated a proper nav mesh implementation, as well as a transparency behavior from previous builds. Here you can see how the old tree didn't have a proper nav mesh implementation, so you could walk through it. But in the new one, you cannot walk where the tree is. You can see here how I made it work by adding an obstacle element to the object that will not allow the guy to walk where the tree is. You can see how the navigation mesh is shown with the blue color on the world. Originally I was baking the navigation mesh and it remained constant because the objects were not moving, but now I needed to make a navigation mesh that will update when the object will be broken. For example, the previous tree, it doesn't update when we break it and we cannot walk on it after it's gone. As I said before, the pushing cube didn't have the proper navigation mesh enabled, so when the guy stops pushing the cube, the navigation mesh doesn't allow the player to walk through the cube anymore. I made this by making the object an obstacle. So by the end of the update, I had the tree working with the navigation mesh, as well as being smashable with the smash button, and when broken it will trigger the loot of wood and plant, as well as the correct particle colors of the object. This was the first final prefab that I managed to make. So in the last update of the month, I made some new smashable rock prefabs. For this, what I did is take the previous working rock and made a smaller and a bigger version out of it. So for the smaller rock, what I did is I scaled down the collider to be able to click on it and made a smaller health bar to show that it has a smaller health than the bigger rock. I made custom loot depending of the object rather than always having the same amount of cubes out of the object. Here I was working on the smart particles and less loot, so it will be only 1 cube. Here you can see how I made that different objects have different smash distance when the guy is smashing the object. When smashing the small rock, the guy will be closer to the rock, but in bigger rocks at a longer smash distance. Here you can see me working now on the big rock by first changing the loot that the rock will spawn after being broken, as well as having more particle emitters when exploding. In the beginning, I actually had a different way of displaying a bigger health bar by having 3 health bars rather than a big one, to show that the stone has 3 times more health. But then I decided to change it because I thought it was more intuitive to have a bigger health bar. Here you can see how the smashing works, as well as how the cubes spawn after the rock being broken. The small rock will spawn only one small cube, when the big rock will spawn multiple ones. I was thinking of this in order to balance, because if you're spending more time breaking an object, you should be rewarded with more material. And finally, here you can see how I was working on the materials and the icons by copy-pasting the same element multiple times. Even though I didn't make the cubes yet, I decided to implement all the materials there, even if they will be now just placeholders. What I was working here was to display for the player, if any materials are missing, it will be displayed with a red background. When we actually manage to gather all the material, the icon will go green and we will be able to click on the build button and then craft the object, when before this was not implemented and we could build the object regardless of the materials we had. Sorry if the time lapses of me working on the Unity were a bit all over the place. I just started recording randomly things to get familiarized on how to record myself working. Actually, the 20 minutes of footage that you guys ended up seeing were originally 5 hours of me working on different things that I had to edit a lot, so they will remain remotely interesting. I didn't want to remove them completely because I think it's very interesting to see how things are done behind the scenes, to appreciate how a thing that you may think that is simple actually works, and how much work it's required to be done to achieve it. I recorded all this footage to make tutorials of specific things that you guys would like me to explain it, but since no one is here yet, I will keep storing all this content for the future. But if you guys like or didn't like that I included this, please leave a comment letting me know if you liked it and which parts you preferred over others. This can help me know if you guys actually enjoy it or not for the next videos. If you guys are interested in the rest of the development, subscribe so you will be able to follow the progress. If you guys have any comments, please leave it down there. I will be happy to read your thoughts. So that's it for this week. Bye!